Here comes the writer's strike, Star Trek, episode 306 of Trekland Tuesdays Live, with me, Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, coming to you from the heart of Trekland and Trekland Treks, through the portal, Portal 47, for some sanity, clarity, and the big picture in things Star Trek. And maybe those words are going to ring a little truer today than normal. We have all kinds of tones here on the show, and today we may be getting into the weeds a little bit. So buckle up. Let's dive into it, because writer's strike. I've been saying I felt guilty the last month or so because you could see this building and looming, and the rest of the world was consumed with the headlines of the day. Trek world was consumed with loving Picard, or the 2% that didn't. I'm not talking about critiquing. I'm talking about just didn't. But no, we've been distracted, and it's been a good distraction. But I've felt a little guilty that we weren't, prepping the world or prepping you all to think about the strike. And well, here it sits. A month ago, I checked in with a couple of Star Trek writers who didn't think it was going to happen. One word was nah, from a Star Trek writer who's been getting a lot of well-deserved attention, I should say. But here it is. For one thing, I cannot believe it's been 15 years since the last strike. And, the strike is not inevitable. They have contracts. The Writers Guild has a contract for a certain amount of years with the producers, as do the directors, the WGA, as do the actors, SAG, and IATSE even, which is all the guild's backstage creative folk of all different kinds. It's the International Association of Theater and Scenic Employees, I think, or Theatrical and Stage Employees, which covers a lot of ground. The Art Directors Guild is in that group. Anyway, it's a lot of fields. But they tend to be, especially SAG directors and writers, all tend to be timed to the same year. And one of them typically goes forward. And just as it was in 2007, it's the writers. They're the canary in the coal mine. All the unions, as is happening right now, all honor each other's strikes and work actions. And you typically think of writers doing their jobs first, and then the directors, and then the actors, and then, and all along you've got pre and post people. But nobody wants to, because what one does affects everybody. And in the old days, that might be, what are the prices we're paying? What are the benefits? What's the contributions to the pension and the health fund and all of that? And one of the last bastions of labor sanity and stability has been Hollywood, even though the rest of the world might look at it as this bunch of elitists. And the worst thing you could do is look at, say, the Actors Guild and think they're all Tom Cruises, or they're all, pick your favorite megastar now. No, that's the upper 1 or 2%. The journeyman working actor is just trying to get, TV gigs, movie gigs, those faces you love to pick out, who occasionally get a lucky break and get to show their stuff and rise up. But most working actors are journeyman actors. It's a little bit the same way with directors, and the Directors Guild includes first ADs and second ADs too, but it's really that way with writers. You've got the run all the way from writer producers who still write and still maintain, can be Writers Guild members, all the way through climbing the ladder writers to the entrant level writers who are just trying to scrap, who are still writing one-off scripts. And we're really looking at a unified, they're split, but the Writers Guild East, which is theatrical in a lot of ways, concerning, but still there's a lot of TV and movies shot out east. They just live there. This is all a thing united. Now I'm going to be dipping into the board here. So what do we know? The contract expired on May 1st. They sat down for their negotiations like usual the last few months, got to an impasse on most items. A month ago, you may have seen this, there was like a 89% turnout with a 98% yes vote to authorize a strike, leaving their leadership to do that. And that's seen, not, they didn't want to go on strike, but that's seen as that's a variable to say, here's how united we are. Because if the producers see a low, apathetic turnout or not, they go, we can divide and conquer here in a labor negotiation. So being very public and saying, here's what the vote was, it was like, well, okay, we know that the writers are pretty united here. And did not happen. Now, what's happened the last 2 or 3 days, there's been kind of a massive education catch-up campaign. And, I'm going to pivot this back to Star Trek, the 07, which I can't believe. And we just did some memory bits about it over the holidays because it wasn't all about Star Trek, but there was a Star Trek star moment there where one of the things that emerged, the 07 strike was the first one to happen in social media days. Because sometimes there's the threat of a strike and then there's a settlement. And sometimes the union backs down. Sometimes there's just a few demands they want changes. When a contract expires and they look at it and go, okay, well, here's what needs to change. Well, sometimes when things are slower or not as, socially upheavalistic, when there's not so much, change and transition going, things are in flux, things are calmer. Times in the 50s, 60s, 70s were that way. Now, famously, we know about the writer's strike from 87 because it affected Star Trek The Next Generation. That's why we only got 20 episodes in the second season. That's why we'll always have Paris, which I start off thinking about Janice and Picard, but it winds up being Data and the bucket on a rod in the Mannheim Effect. I'll never forget Rob Legato, visual effects director, visual effects producer, first season, telling me how they were able to finish the show and not cross the picket line because they were brainstorming what a line anyway, they had to do posts and it was after the fact. And, there's a common mistake that people think the writer's strike happened at the end of season 2. And that's why Maury Hurley left. And that's why we got Shades of Grey, the clip show. It was a year earlier. It was a year earlier. It had nothing to do with the end of second season. So yeah, writer strikes have woven in and out of Star Trek and been part of it. And of course, the 07-08 strike we were in the fallow days. Although Bob Orci and Alex Kurtzman were at Paramount working on the script for Star Trek 09 as it was being shot. They were doing their writer hats, but they honored the strike completely and made no changes. Maybe that could have helped. Made no changes in the script while they were shooting it. And the 07-08 strike, the one in 87 was largely seen as a failure, like it was very disruptive and didn't accomplish all that much. But the 07-08 was a watershed, both because it was, along with the social media era, it was the creeping dawn of new media. And it was a time when producers were looking at little web promotional pieces. Not just, hello, I'm so-and-so on. Scenes, dramatic little scenes pulled out special, written separately from episodes to advertise shows. And it was just seen as promotion, not real writing. And writers were saying, no, you can't ask us because it's a slippery slope and where will this end? And there were a whole host of issues. But the biggest thing was, even as we were just having the dawn of the prestige Netflix not Game of Thrones, The Sopranos, and Lost was revolutionizing serial TV, it was a very transitory time there, transitional time. The Writers Guild sensed it. And it was, again, a ripple effect that was going to affect the directors and that arena and the actors. And then secondarily, the IATSE folk, the crews, creative staffs and crews. And once again, then it was the writers that went first, and they championed not looking at things as blow off. Among the many issues they tackled and won on was this treatment of, no, there is no blow off writing. And as we adapt to new media, you're going to treat new media the same way we do now. Now, what's happened since then? Well, what happened that year also, the big turning point. And it was great because it was the last thing the old Star Trek.com covered as a news story with our team here in LA was the strike. And then a week later we were gone, and folks said maybe it was us covering the strike. No, it had nothing to do with it. It was the bean counters at a time of huge transition and uproot with the Viacom divorce having happened. But in that time, disruption, it was the first social media strike, and basically the Guild, with the world starting to rise up and see what was going on, And just think, the election of Barack Obama was later that year. So it was a very interesting time, but the Guild got the public on their side. They explained what was going on. They made it look very easy, that this is about fairness, that these were not elitists living in their ivory tower castles that average Joe and John and Mary couldn't relate to. They made it about working writers trying to have a wage, and about basically about fairness and being taken advantage of. As the upper 1%, 2% were taking advantage. They got the public on their side, which added even more to their own unity. It lasted 100 days. It went through the last couple of months of 07 and into 08, but it was pretty successful. It was a success. It was much better than the last major strike. It was not a fizzle. And here we go. We had contracts come up, I think, midway a few years ago. We've had renewal since then, but here we're at the time, and now we're at another one of those pivot times. And I think it's going to be dawning very quickly on folks, if they do half the job of communicating that they did last time, except it needs to happen very quickly, and it's already happening, that this is also about fairness. But like everything else the last few years, whatever you used to think the parameters were, well, it's on steroids now. It's on steroids now. And it's led by, as you may guess, the revolution in how you see shows. Yeah, we've got Abbott Elementary and her sister-in comedies and one-hour dramas on network are still out there. But what's the bulk of what you watch? What's the bulk of what gets ink and buzz? What turns up on the Parrot Analytics every week? What wins the Emmys? We're talking here mostly TV. These issues are mostly going to be affecting the TV side of things. Although features in the streaming world are going to apply too. But, for years, I grew up reading The Making of Star Trek that talked about TV in the 60s. The 80s and the syndication revolution was something that Next Gen pioneered, and syndication writers got paid a little less than Prestige Network. Wasn't fair, but that's what it was. And we've had this okay, now we've gone to Netflix with the premium channel revolution. And now we've got streaming, and we tend to think about streaming as being all about the serialized storytelling. It's also about these short seasons. Oh, well, that's what the BBC's done for years. Oh, well, I mean, they have a completely different structure. People are still paying license fees for their TV to the BBC because that's the British media model. So no, short streams have led to less exhausted writers' rooms and crews. You're doing 10 instead of 26 or 12, maybe 13. Now it's standardizing into 10, maybe even 8. Okay. But what that means is it's totally disrupted the model that people got paid by. Imagine if you went from a 40-hour work week to a 20-hour work week. And yay, okay. But you're an hourly employee. Now, that may sound simplistic when you think of, ooh, Hollywood. But it's the truth. That's at the core of what's going on. It's not only that. There's all kinds of evolutions that have occurred that I'm catching up on that have happened with the, not the serialized era, but the streaming short season era. There's this thing called the mini rooms in the old days. Okay, imagine this was your downtown industry, right? In the old days, if you wanted to be a writer and your dream, just like Gene's was, Gene Roddenberry in the 60s and 70s, when the market was much huger for freelance script writing, because a show would have a showrunner and maybe an assistant writer, and everything was freelance. There was no room. The room was the two people having a meeting with somebody. That's the way Gene wrote for Have Gun. That's the way they wrote for the original series Star Trek. It wasn't until the coming of the 80s, and oh my gosh, now we've got staffs of 7, 6, 8 people. And you're still taking freelance scripts, and the writer staff is still writing 1 or 2 or 3 even a year, but they're also doing rewrites on. Okay, there's that. That's been all documented as in happy birthday yesterday for the red edition of the companion. That was a lot of fun on socials, but that model's gone. Now we laugh about all the executive producers listed in the opening titles. Well, some of those EPs, they're writer producers, and some of them are producer producers, and some of them are graduated actor producers, actually, when they take that much of a role in the content of the show. And when you've gone from 26 down to 10, that's a focal thing, sure. But writers, it's not just a matter of you can't write for one show and make a living. And again, we're not talking about the upper end writers. We're not talking about the glamours or the stars. We're talking about the journeyman worker writers. Every week, even watching Star Trek, you're seeing new names bubble up, which is cool, which is good. You watch all shows and you see the new names coming along that you don't know already. And that's the turnover. That's the growth of the industry. That's new writers getting it. Happens with actors, and lesser extent, of course, it's happening everywhere. It's happening in any industry that happens. It's just that we're very public with credits in media that way. But the world of coming to LA, or even sitting at home wherever you are and Zooming, but yeah, you need some FaceTime, making your mark, getting your foot in the door, pitching, all those kinds of things, the way the thing is put together. I've seen some smart folks tweeting about this recently, because you can look at charts. If you just want to look at the money issue of this, basically it's the structure. People are saying basically you're making Hollywood the way it's settled because it's blown up. The old residual system that kept you sustained either between jobs, or maybe you were climbing the ladder to go from a low writer to a mid-level staff writer to co-producer, co-executive producer. Well, now when you get that high, now you're out and you're pitching your own shows and getting respect. And now you can see your own ideas put, and yes, make more money, but now you can turn around and you can hire younger writers. All of that's been blowing up as more and more of the shows we watch aren't old 22, 26 episode model network shows with commercials. As that model has blown up, so has the reality of what a world is like for the Writers Guild is basically saying it's made it where unless you come from an independently wealthy family and you want to start writing, you can't afford to be a journeyman writer working your butt off and expect to get rewarded. You sell a story, you sell a script, you have a few more scripts. If you make some contacts and networks, eventually maybe you get into your foot's in the door for a writer's room. It's all up and down the line. This use of, have you heard about this use of mini rooms, where someone gets to pitch a story to a Netflix or an Amazon or one of the streaming channels, and they want you to develop it first? They want you to go hire or ask writers to work for nothing with promise of future payment that's a mini room. And the people you brought in to work on it aren't get paid, or you're paying out of your own pocket. And then let's say it gets picked up, and then the streaming network channel is under no obligation to even keep on the people that you had helping you develop the show. It's nuts. It's nuts. People put their time in helping develop this, thinking they're going to get to work on it and be creative and also get paid for their work, and they're out in the cold. It's insane. That's one of the bugaboos. Basically, what the big picture here is the Writers Guild is saying, and with the actors and with the directors and all the creative guilds watching on, is saying that the shift in how studios are owned, stop me if you've heard this before, the way it's become all stock driven and growth driven. It's not enough for shows to be either successes or failures, and failures happen. And sometimes shows that just aren't as mega popular as other shows. That's happened. It's the dawn of time. That's the evolutionary system at work. That's survival of the fittest. That's the capitalist system. But the success ratio, the reward system isn't about successes and failures. It's about overall growth of the umbrella of the. I know I don't mean the Law and Order franchise or the Star Trek franchise. It's the studios, and more of the studios are corporately owned and have big, fat CEOs at the top. Watch your socials. So here's one from the AFL-CIO in support of the WGA. Last year, 8 major Hollywood studio CEOs made over $773 million in annual salary. That's 8. Many of the writers who write their shows can't afford rent, or they've got to hustle and write for 2 different shows to fill out the year, or just the structure of how payments are. Because it used to be I make fun of it, but our one story sale shared with 6 people, right? What became Prophecy on Voyager. Once a quarter we get a $9 check, which is hysterical. We're split. We get, $12, $15, $18, $20 check for that one, a Voyager, not Next Gen, not the original series, but Voyager, which is fun. Now, if we'd been full-time writers, that of course would have multiplied. That's also what allows writers to take risks and go off on a chase and try to develop shows and try to do that. But it's also what sustains the working writer. Well, if you blow up, if your 26 slot season comes down to 10, then that's fine. Whoa, you say there's more than 4 networks now. There's all these networks. Yeah, but they're all 10 item shows. They're all 10 slot shows or less. There's no avenue for the freelancers, for the new writers to come in and get there. There's lots more stress, lots more pressure. Those who can survive that initial culling period, a lot of people can't hack it. A lot of creative voices, the diversity that we're all screaming and craving for, those folks can't get in the door that way. But it's not just about that. There's an amazing fact here. To fund every demand this year, which is basically trying to refigure the way the payment system and credits and residuals and all that is worked, matches a streaming model, not the dying old dinosaur network model. That's what this is all about. They've got to say, oh, look, things have evolved. Okay, fine. We'll match the whole model of how we work to that. Because the thing we were hitched to before, sure, it lasted 30, 40. Well, there were no residuals in the 50s. Thank you, Lucy and Desi. There were no reruns. So that was an evolutionary change. So the model we've had since the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts has blown up. It's no longer relevant. It's, 20% of what you see that's out there? I've been watching some threads from John Rogers, from Albert Kim, from Joe Keohane, who his thread is talking about, he's a New Yorker. He's East Coast. He came from the magazine world. And he says what happened to the magazine world is threatening to happen to TV and movies by extension. That it went from the quality pieces, and it wasn't just about going online, but the online revolution made a race to the bottom for quality and for payment. Where it gets to the point where you can't write online like the old. It didn't just go from dead tree media to digital media. There was a whole huge change in there to where new writers coming in are told, well, write for free and it'll be good exposure. Well, you don't pay bills with good exposure. And the whole concept of journeyman writers, journeyman anybody, learning their craft, making mistakes, being mentored is completely blown up. To the fact that on the other extreme, some writers come in and they don't have the ability to be mentored in a room and climb that ladder because the ladder doesn't exist anymore. And it's not just that streaming shows only go 3 seasons of 10 episodes. Maybe that's the average. That's only 30 episodes. 3 seasons of 26 would be 3 times that. So this is beyond just comparing who's been in Star Trek makeup more than another actor. This is the real ripple effect of the 10 episode season, which in many ways has led to some amazing writing and moments and cinematic TV and all of these, and the lowering of barriers between TV and movie. Those are all ripple effects for the good. But when you talk about the people who are making it and the people who are struggling to make it a craft and an art and not have the entire TV industry, much less TV and film, turned into a giant gig economy where everybody winds up being, for the 99% wind up being gig workers, being freelancers. In the old days where there were freelancers, but there was a structure and people at the top that you answered to and they cared about the quality of the show, not where it was one big massive gig factory and say Amazon or Netflix or the rest who are, Disney now that they're in the streaming business, Paramount now that they're in the streaming business, are getting this. This Joe Keohane is talking about, he bemoans what happened to magazines, and he thinks it's all karmic that Vice and BuzzFeed, the disruptors who set off this stampede to the bottom, he's saying, are now failing too. He says same thing is happening in Hollywood. Confronted with the growth of digital disruptions, studios panicked and started flooding the market with content, driven by the naive and lunatic idea that as long as you're growing subscriptions, a viable business plan will reveal itself. So they lost a lot of money, saturated the market, overwhelmed the viewers, and put writers on a path to a situation where the only one who'll be able to afford to write for them are the people who don't actually need to write, who don't need to work. And now he says you've got Wall Street demanding these companies actually make money. Hello, bye-bye sixth season of Discovery. And don't talk about, oh, well, Discovery deserved it. It could have been any Star Trek that was in that place at that time. This is the retrenching of the industry, which is not just about, oh, well, it's the weather. This is human foibles and human decisions. Wall Street demanding that these companies start to make money. He says, because contrary to the ruinous Silicon Valley mentality, you can't butter your parsnips with growth. Okay. And instead of new ideas, the studios have responded with massive cuts. With the writer's strike, as with the magazines, the studio argument against compensating writers fairly is that if they do, they won't be able to keep doing the thing they've been doing, which also happens to not even remotely work. This is, I love this strain. John Rogers' tweet says the new robber barons of Hollywood are on a suicide run. They'll extract as much wealth out of the system as they can before it crashes, and they'll beat up the workforce as much as they need to create savings to make Wall Street happy, to stretch out the run. He's saying this is what happened to Kmart, Toys R Us. This is airline stock buybacks. It's just gone from hard infrastructure and retail into information and entertainment. It's big picture stuff. Yeah. The companies are making between 28 and 30 billion in profit every year for the last 5 years, pandemic or not. Somewhere I saw a statistic about what all the Writers Guild demands. If we've paid everything to what they're asking for, what it would amount to, and it was a sliver of the profits. Here it is. WGA's proposals would have cost the companies $429 million a year. And he says, in other words, Ari Emanuel and David Zaslav, who are, David Zaslav is Discovery. Yeah, is Discovery CEO, Discovery NBC. Ari Emanuel is Endeavor, which I'm going back to remember. Those two alone, he says, could have paid all of that themselves and still walked away with $63 million each in salary. So that's it. And then just the path of these negotiations have been a little arrogant. The DGA put out their demands, the proposals, and 2/3 of them the producers wouldn't even like negotiate over. So it's they're looking at streaming features, looking at you, Section 31 movie coming down the road, and all of this, just breaking down. They want to do away with weekly pay, the idea that you've got a weekly salary that's basing it on, and then your per script thing comes later. Being invested in a room, that's blown up with the new streaming model, and it's gone away. But preserving the writer's room concept, getting rid of the mini room where you work and may not even get paid for what you do. And then there's sections here about foreign streaming where they've offered back on these things that have to do with like money and pieces. But these structural elements that are making the old model extinct because the world has changed and they haven't been paying for it, and that's why these profits are so huge. So that's what's going on. You can research, you can find. I'll post on Trekland some of these guys' threads, but you can find them. I mean, you can do hashtag. You can find some of our Star Trek folk out there in the forefront. Bill Wolkoff, who's on Strange New Worlds, I think #2 in the room under Henry. He's out tweeting constantly. You see everybody is in support. And yes, SAG and the DGA, Directors Guild, they're all in sympathy. What that also means is, and what happens, and what you're going to be seeing real quickly in different aspects of the media, is how the strike ripples effects right now. So what's affected immediately? Well, the live shows. So all your late, as if just not quite as it was in the pandemic, at least people could work from home. But those of you who remember 15 years ago, there's famous video of Conan twirling his wedding ring to take up time on the show. They would come on and just, self monologue, not write anything, because even if the host was a member of the Writers Guild, they wouldn't be allowed to write something. So, but they could come out and, for a time, spitball. And a lot of you remember that was 100 days. That was basically 3 months. But yeah, the live shows, which starts off being the nightly talk shows, you're going to see that immediately. Everybody's Dark tonight, and that'll go on. The scripted shows, the streaming shows, where are they now? We're in the spring. The seasons were wrapped. The old school model would have been everybody was wrapping up, well, by now, and they would be not far from coming back working on the old fall debut shows. Well, that's blown up with the streaming shows. What's interesting is I was trying to take a inventory of how this affects us. I mean, let's think down the line. So now, at one point, I just had a great visit and lunch with Aaron Walke at Prodigy. As they wrap up their season 2, most people are home. It's just the core group getting it done at the end. And they're waiting on season 3. So hashtag give us a season 3 Prodigy. They are a step away. They have a different union, thanks to Walt Disney. The animation world, actors, writers, everything have all been diminished. Back in the day, they weren't, in Walt Disney's time, thanks to Disney, writers weren't writers. They were story people, like inkers on, they were just part of the cog. And so the entire animation world and industry, with a few exceptions, and they have a separate union, which had been valiantly trying to make up the huge gap. They had negotiations last year. You're not going to see this affecting Strange New Worlds and Prodigy because they're all in that line. It's the Animation Guild. It's TAG. So, but they're in support. They stand. They went through negotiations last year. They made up a fourth of the gap that separates them from the Writers Guild writers, and they're going to be working on that. That's their issue in the animation world. So as far as Star Treks go, our 2 animated series are not going to see any kind of a slippage on the surface. But of our live actions, look what's happened. Discovery, they were adding and shooting extra footage to end the 5th season as the series finale. That's basically been done, I hear. So Picard is done. And as we hear from Terry all the time and everybody on that staff, no word about a green light. So what does that leave us? For a year, you and your view screen, however you watch Star Trek, we've got Star Trek through the rest of the year that's already been produced or it's being wrapped up. So no, we're waiting on season 2 of Strange New Worlds. It was done last year. You're not going to be disrupted to see Strange New Worlds. That'll have nothing to do with what comes up June 15th, 16th. And then after that, Lower Decks and Prodigy have nothing to do with. And after that, what's happened? The 5th season of Discovery has now been promoted to a high pedestal. Its final year. It's been bumped into the spring. That won't be disrupted. So we're going to have hiatus gaps because we'll only be looking at 2 live action and 2 animated. What's supposed to fill the Section 31 movie is basically done. They're going to film it this fall when Michelle has they're prepping to shoot when Michelle has her available window. Whether that's set up as a backdoor pilot or what comes out of that, whatever happens, it'll be affected or not by this. But for right now, the movie itself, I'm hearing, is basically intact. So what does that leave us? Well, if Strange New Worlds is airing, that means they're pretty close to shooting. They're pretty close to gearing up for season 3 and going. And I'm thinking Strange New Worlds could be delayed. Now, we won't see it. And maybe there's time to depending on how long the strike is. If it's another 3-month strike, then yeah, we may have some more weeks. We may have more weeks in 2024 without Trek. Or we may see the back end of Prodigy put forward to fill the time. I don't know. I'm totally guessing. But those are the things we're talking about, impacts in 2024 at the earliest, just as far as an audience. And I say that because impacts, the other core thing way beyond Star Trek, the whole thing about this strike is, just as in 07 and 08, and I need to mention this, is that the dreaded ripple effects. A lot of people are going to be sacrificing. Now, people have been pointing out how, yeah, TV shows were affected. Modern Housewives was affected. Lost was affected. The Office was a lot of shows. Some Heroes, they say, died because of the strike, could never recover and come back after that. Some shows just lost their mojo. So yeah, there were casualties that year, and some people, hopefully people went on to other projects, and the people that didn't, or that was the highlight of their professional career, they're probably always going to be bitter about that. But for the most part, what's animating folks is the sacrifice, and the sacrifice of writers and all the other guilds who are not going to cross their picket lines. So actors, so directors. So production shuts down. And when production shuts down, what does that mean? That means that now there's nobody, the crews. It trickles down to the Hollywood industries. Who's renting the furniture? Who's renting the greens? Who's catering the meals? Who's supplying makeup? Who's feeding that monster? All of those secondary systems are shut down as well. And there might be layoffs. It's rough coming back from pandemic and the inflation that's finally starting to calm down a little bit. It's a rough time. And that was all part of the factor in deciding whether to do this. But they know that those things, those last for a year or two. But these rates, when they're locked in, the writers and the rest of Hollywood, knowing that as go the writers, so go directors and actors. And that trickles, I hate to say trickles down, but that affects the crews, all the crews and designers that are part of IATSE. That will affect everybody. And ultimately, is our entertainment, the content, the thing that keeps us sane as consumers? This isn't a Hollywood elitist thing. For one thing, Hollywood is all over the country. This affects the folks shooting in New York and Atlanta and Vancouver. And yeah, it's Canadian, but it affects them. And Toronto. The UK writers have already said they're going to honor, they're not going to take any American jobs offered to them. They're not going to be scabs even from the UK. And that's out there. It's that ripple effect. And that is a consequence. And that is damning. That's something that gets taken into account on this. And part of this whole experience is, I can't believe it's been 15 years since then. But what I'm reading online, I'm seeing tweets, I'm seeing younger folks grappling with this. I'm seeing their mentors. I'm seeing younger, Gen Z consumers and audience people who love their stuff and might be a little pissed off if it's taken away. And a valiant effort being made by their peers and by everybody up and down the age spectrum to say, look, this is not just about your immediate gratification, if that's the way it strikes you. This is about, what are things going to be like going forward? Are you going to, just like Uncle Walt hamstrung an entire century, they're still recovering, as one example of that, how you get off in that, it's hard to make up the gaps when you're there. And if the entire entertainment world we've known for 100 years is gigified and gutted out the way people are bemoaning print journalism and magazines and newspapers, and go down the list of how many other industries, if that's gigified, just so it's all about profit and growth and satisfying Wall Street folk and showing money, and your upper dogs are sucking all the money out of the system that could go to everybody else being secure and happy and having a life. That's not a competition. It shouldn't be a zero-sum game that only Hollywood gets to live this way. That's the way everybody should. And that's what's gone wrong with the economy. And boy, this got deep in a minute. But yeah, it's reflective. And one of the successes of the 2007 strike was educating the public to the reality of that. That, like, no, don't say you're jealous of us. You need to demand why you don't have that. And we're seeing, my God, the 15 hourly wage. We're seeing the Starbucks and some of the retail, the pandemic ripped the Band-Aid off of, oh yeah, how essential are they? Well, then you should pay them that much. We saw how an economy can grind to a halt. And don't even get me started about teachers and support people. The way the economy is in turn, and who's rewarded and who's not. So don't talk to me about Hollywood elitism. The pandemic was supposed to have exposed all this. And they did a great job in 2007 of saying, this is how we work. This has yielded what we've had for all these years. And there's actually more of a national ripple effect now than there was even then. As much as we've been known the loss of, parochially, the jobs from LA and California going to other places, that's also kind of nationalized this, which I hadn't really thought about until just now. So yeah, depending on how big the market is, there's a ripple effect. little pockets of this are going to be affecting, because it's not just about the writers, it's about the shutdown of productions. Again, starting with the lives, the filmed will be snaking out. In the old days, we would have been worried about the fall premieres, and you will be if you're still got your fall network, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox shows. That'll be there. The streamers are all over the map, all over the calendar. And again, as I said, in Star Trek world, we won't see a ripple effect until 2024. Strange New Worlds could be delayed. Starfleet Academy's whole development, they were supposed to shoot in the spring. That means development beforehand. If this strike goes on, that could be delayed. And if that could be delayed, we're waiting on Star Trek Legacy even longer. And I haven't even mentioned AI. I almost forgot to mention AI. They want to start talking about not losing their jobs to a computer. And I don't blame, the WGA doesn't want to be M5'd. And I believe that in a time when we're talking about that. People are also talking about the friend Dave Blass had a good tweet about the AI. And that's part of one of the things in negotiating proposals. It's about, they want to study the impact. They want protections against basically being replaced by computer writers. And the producers don't even want to talk about it. Artificial intelligence. Regulate the use of artificial intelligence on MBA covered projects, partner projects. AI cannot write or rewrite literary material, cannot be used as source material, and MBA covered material cannot be used to train AI. And the studios countered with a rejection and saying they offered annual meetings to discuss advancements in technology, which is basically a nothing burger. So that's, as much as everything else is reacting to now, that's a ticking time bomb for the future. And I almost forgot to mention it. And another, as we're all sitting around, it's not so much about robots taking over. Robots taking over your job is bad enough. And the abuse of AI, and maybe it's not taking off your job, maybe it just outcompetes you to where the whiz-bang writer over here is really just a room full of AI bots. So yeah, a lot of issues. And what do you think? Are you up to snuff with this? I don't know how much I helped in my little way here today, but it's going to be front and center as the night shows go off, as we start hearing about a length and duration and what's going to affect the traditional calendar for fall, the shows not on traditional calendar, what the turnaround will be, if it's any faster than a fall premiere. But it's going to be in our face. And is the WGA East and West going to be able to explain their position and have the public behind them? Hey, if you're watching us later on YouTube, just know that you could have joined us here live. We're about to hit the chat here in a minute. But before I do that, I want to just remind everybody, thanks for joining in. And before we hit that chat, I want to thank everybody in the TTLers. This is my Patreon. So thank you. Diana Hopkins, Lawrence Todd, Justin Porteous, Chris Jiggins, Robin Wilson, Anne-Marie Siegel, Glinda Bruton, Pranakasha Productions, and Andrew Jasimski. And our live wires, Robin McLean, Byron Bailey, J.R. Poole, Halbeard Gunn Johnson, Alan Hohensey, Dave Gregory, Tobias Rex, Donna Runyon, and Casey Shafsky. Thanks so much. It's a new month, so it comes out at the end of the month. But you too can join up. Patreon does that. It's $5. It's $10 for a shout out. The $10 folks get access to a ton of our original backstage Trek interviews and conversations, and a lot of personal pictures from the first 2 or 3 years of Portal 47, the early years. So glad to have you along with that. As it becomes summertime, and maybe you're missing entertainment, you can make your own entertainment with your own custom away mission. Come out to LA, work with me up front at treklandtreks.com. We'll set up a day where I host you, pick you up hotel to hotel, and we visit 4 of the sites you pick out with my help, and we'll have a lunch along the way. I'll help you with your cosplay, whatever you want to do. It's your own away mission in real life, out and about. treklandtreks.com. It's coming up this summer season. And hey, look who's back on the Trek Files today. It dropped as it always does, early Tuesday. The great John Eves. Speaking of the Art Directors Guild, Life Achievement Award winner for Trek and so much more. We claim him in Trekland. He's just an awesome guy, and he's back talking about updating the looks of Trek back in the past and for today. You don't want to miss it. This week's Trek Files at the Trek File. The documents, the DC Fontana memo that sparked this is right there at facebook.com/the Trek Files. But, podcast.roddenberry.com is where you can see all the Roddenberry podcasts too. And as I leave you later, just a reminder, you can find me on Twitter, where I'll be retweeting a lot of folks that I'm following about the strike progress and seeing what people are saying privately as well as publicly. That's at Larry Nemecek. And hey, if you haven't already, like and subscribe us on YouTube. We're growing. Finally, thanks so much for that. We're like the animation writers. We have miles to go to catch up, but we're going to get there. No, I'm not comparing myself to their economic situation, merely the mathematical curve. Support the animation folks and the animation voice folks when it comes time for their struggle too, okay? It's Larry Nemecek's Trekland, though, on Instagram, which is a lot of fun, and Facebook, and YouTube. Portal47.net, take a look. Jump in with us. It's like a mini-con all year long. For the folks who had no idea how much Star Trek they had no idea about. And yeah, this has been a deep dive into the business end of things. It's going to ripple out to Star Trek. We love to talk about the history. I love to talk about the romance of that day and the fun of that day. But it was in 2007 at the Star Trek theme strike. But it was about very serious issues. And fortunately, at that time, they were able to hang together and show a unified force. So that's it, gang. And if you are leaving us right now, later, again, try to watch us live if you get a second. But thanks for watching in any case. Hey, stay well. Do all the things. Stay woke. Check your sources. And trek well, everybody.